Welcome back to the Anatomy of Faith, Series 2. And tonight it's twilight time, and the sun is just going down on a day that's just about completed. And the day, the calendar date, in this case, is not quite as consequential as another count that we have. And this was 33 L'Matmonim, also known as Lag BaOmer. The Matmonim, we Jewish people count 49 days. Mem Tes is the numerical value of 49. Those are the days that intervene between Pesach and Shavuos. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to count off these 49 days. But besides the baseline mitzvah commanded in the Torah to count off 49 days, layers in the passage of millennia, layers of meaning and of understanding have, I guess in theme with tonight's class, if you take the bare bones mitzvah of the dry count, so to speak, it's been fleshed out. There's been a nervous system attached. There's been a muscle culture. There's been soft tissue. There's been a circulatory system. There's a lot that goes into the mitzvah of counting off the days between Pesach and Shavuos. And in particular, this last night, this past day, Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, has many different levels of significance. It's most observed as the yahrzeit, as the death anniversary day of the great Tana, author of the Mishnah, that is, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is also traditionally known as the author of the Zohar, the Book of Splendor. The Zohar is the baseline text of the hidden wisdom of the Torah, also known as Kabbalah, sometimes called Jewish mysticism. In any event, this being the case, and those of you who've been studying in this series and the original Anatomy of Faith series know that we try to combine, as much as a high school grad can muster anyway, some scientific, anatomical, biological wisdom of the structure of the human body with Torah. Tonight, I'm going to be doing almost exclusively Torah, and if I'm allowed to do this, and a Chafetz Chaim affiliate, a little bit crossover into perhaps the realm of mysticism in exploring tonight's topic, which is of spines and serpents. Okay? Now it's alliterative a little bit. Both words begin with an S. I have a little bit of an S, so I mispronounce both of them, an equal opportunity speech impediment. But in any event, you're probably wondering, it's catchy. I did a little word art on the flyer. The serpent, the word undulates a little bit. But what do spines have to do with serpents? The Naschel V'Naimer. Without further ado, let's get to work on tonight's topic. Okay. Before we can even begin to understand any comparisons and contrasts between spines and serpents, it's important to understand one of the observances of Sfiras HaOmer in general and Lag BaOmer in particular. And that is that the number 49 is easily divisible by the number 7. 7 times 7 equals 49. As a matter of fact, the mitzvah is set on both levels. You're supposed to count days and you're supposed to count weeks. Jewish mystics attached the idea of tikkun hamidos, the rectification, the ennobling, the refinement of character traits during these 7 weeks that intervene between Pesach and Shavuos. On a prosaic level, as a way of getting ready, as a purification on a national level, of getting ready for the receiving of the Torah, the operative maxim always is, Derech Eretz Kodma Torah. Derech Eretz, the way of the world, fine manners, fine character traits, that's a prerequisite to the Torah. So we want to improve on our midos. However, these are not midos that necessarily make it into your average table of contents of a Mussar Sefer on the Mussar shelves of your typical mainstream yeshiva. These midos that we refine, that we're trying to refine, and that we devote a week, 1 week each, of the Sfira count to refining, are related to the bottom 7 Sfiros that the Jewish Kabbalists have articulated. There are a total of 10 spheros. Spheros are best defined, I guess, as emanations or divine attributes. And the top three, the upper three, are known as mochin, are known as brains, mind. They relate to the mind more. And the bottom 7 relate more to our emotional life, to our what we would call our personality traits. Okay? So, one of these midos, and the midah that we're going to be discussing tonight, is the midah of hod. And hod, the Hebrew word is hod. Hod is a certain kind of beauty. Okay, I'll get to specifically what type of beauty I'm talking about in a few minutes, if you allow me. Hod, now again, you have to understand, since it is 7 times 7, the way, when we do the mitzvah Shriyas HaOmer, there is a liturgy that we say after counting every night of Shriyas HaOmer. Okay, we have the Chumashim out tonight, we don't have the Sidurim out. If anyone's interested after the class, I'll show you where it's stated. Even in a Nusach Ashkenaz, decidedly unmystical siddur, somehow or another this made it into mainstream Judaism, something that seems to be observed by everybody. And we talk about the confluence and the interplay between the various midos. So if the first day of Shriyas HaOmer, namely the second evening, the evening of the second day of Passover, we start with chesed shebechesed, right? Kindness of kindness, then we move our way through. The next day is gvura shebechesed, tefer shebechesed, and so on. The way it comes out every single time is Lag BaOmer is the day in Shriyas HaOmer of hod shebahod, the ultimate of this midah, of hod, of this characteristic, of this kind of beauty. Okay. I'm going to digress for a moment and read you a Gemara from Tractate Tainus, and then we'll come back to our discussion of aesthetics and Judaism in general, and the trait of hod in particular. Okay. The Gemara is in Tractate Tainus 28. I'm going to give you a running translation over here. The Gemara is talking about how the wicked Bilam, the hired mouth, I'm not going to call him a hired gun, the hired mouth that was supposed to put a hit on the Jewish people before they even crossed the Jordan and made it into the land of Canaan. Whatever he tried in terms of cursing the Jewish people was miraculously, or through the interference of angels, was transformed into a blessing. And one of the things that the Gemara talks about over here is the contrast between a reed, a kona, and a cedar tree. And the Gemara says as follows. The reed is always in a well-watered area. Reeds cannot grow in an arid climate. Their leaves constantly change from season to season. They grow a new one. They have a tremendous root network. And when the storms come, they'll bend this way, they'll bend that way, they'll bend, but they won't break. Okay? A cedar tree does not naturally grow by water, doesn't have seasonal changes of its of the actual plant, and really does, comparatively speaking, doesn't have a lot of roots. So generally when storms come, owing to the stiffness and the stoutness of an adult, of a mature cedar tree, it can also basically withstand a good wind. But when the south wind comes, a storm from the south, okay, I'm not a meteorologist, but I'll take the Gemara's word for it, it uproots it, and it turns it on its head. Not only that, but the reed is something from which Torah scribes whittle their pens out of. The pen that is used to write and to communicate Divrei Torah comes from the reed. It's not something that's chiseled out of the bark or out of the wood of a cedar tree. And then it concludes as follows. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, a person should always try to be as supple and as soft as a reed, and not as strong and tough as a cedar tree. Okay, I think the metaphor is pretty clear. When you're stubborn, when you're intransigent, when you're inflexible, you may be able to hold your ground for a while, but ultimately, okay, when you don't bend at all, you have a tendency to break when the pressure gets too great. Whereas when you're supple, okay, you go this way, you go that way, the storm passes, and you're upright again. Okay. So here I'm going to share with you an idea from the Pachad Yitzchak, one of the great 20th century Jewish thinkers. And he's talking about, in particular, he wants to know, in general, a good working definition for beauty, for aesthetics. And in particular, since there are a lot of near synonymous words in Lashon Kodesh, in the Holy Tongue, Yofi, Chen, Pe'er, or Tiferet, and Hod, Hadar. All of these words have some kind of a connotation for beauty. Correct? Okay? So first, what's beauty in general? So his definition of beauty is, the antonym of beauty is monotony. Okay? We've been through this before, Betty Ann, so I won't invoke the holy name of Jackson Pollock tonight. But suffice it to say that most Philistines, like me, like yours truly, have a very hard time looking at a monochromatic canvas, or looking at a big, 12 by 18 canvas that's all black or all red and all blue, and seeing any beauty there. Certainly, if I went to the symphony, okay, and I come in and the conductor has a baton pointed, at a 90-degree angle, whatever, the whole time, and the orchestra just goes, sounds like one of my classes, no? At any rate, it goes like that on for 45 minutes. Yeah, I'm not going to notice any beauty there. All right? So monotony is a great beauty killer, if you will. Well, whether it's a monotonous sound, whether it's a monotonous look, right? If there's no differentiation, okay? On the other hand, chaos is not beautiful either. To have a million colors, or a cacophony of sounds, without any way of harmonizing them, without any way of synthesizing them, that's not beautiful either. So the definition of beauty is the capacity to take disparate things, to take things that are really antithetical to one another, and bring them together as a harmonious whole. That appeals to our sense of what we call aesthetics, to our sense of, that's when we react to something beautiful. Now, the peculiar beauty that the Hebrew word hod means is an intrinsic beauty where I'm not trying to take black and white, red and blue, bass notes and treble notes, right? I'm taking something that has a self-contradiction in itself. It negates itself, it's antithetical to itself, and yet I'm bringing it together harmoniously. And that is the strength that masquerades as a weakness. When you have something that looks weak, right? But suddenly you have an epiphany, you have this moment of recognition, you say, no, that's not weak. That's true strength. That's a certain kind of beauty. And that beauty is what we call hod. Pachad Yitzchak associates hod is the beauty of that reed that's bending every which way. It seems like the biggest wimp, if you will. Right? It doesn't matter which way, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. Okay? The reed knows immediately which way the wind blows. Okay? It's moving this way, I'll move this way. It's moving that way, I'll move that way. It's always bending. Never resists. It's never an opponent. Right? It looks tremendously weak, unprincipled, weak, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, when the storm passes, and it's still here, it's a survivor, and not only a survivor, but an erect survivor, that's something beautiful. And he says, you'll notice that in Lashon Kodesh, in Hebrew, hod v'hadar almost always go together. It's very rare to find anywhere in the biblical canon that the words hod and hadar are separated from one another. And hadar is related etymologically to the Aramaic word for to return. Chazar, the Hebrew word chazar, is translated in Aramaic as hadar. Hadar. Okay? So the hod is miloshen modin. Hod, to confess, to bend, to bow. Thank you is a gesture of subservience, a gesture of dependence, a gesture of non-opposition when one bows. All right? That's hod, as in the word you can hear literally, even if it's not literate in Hebrew. Modem anachnu lach. All right? Hadar, back up. Straight, erect. All right? He gives one example. It's a very beautiful, it's a long, long talk. If I would say over the whole passage of Pachah Yitzchak, we wouldn't have time for anything else. But I'll just give you one example that he cites. There's a pasuk in Tehillim that says, Ma enosh kisis karenu v'enanu kisif kadenu asher tna hodecha ala shamayim. What is man, what is enosh, that you should remember him? Or the son of man, that you should recall him? Give your hod upon the heavens. Okay? Our sages interpret this verse in the Tehillim to be the opposition of the angels of giving the Torah to human beings. When God wanted to give the Torah to human beings, it's a holiday, it's upcoming now. Schwartz is the holiday of Matan Torah, of the giving of the Torah. The angels opposed this idea and they said, Asher tna hodech al hashamayim. Keep or put your beauty upon the heavens. Don't give it to man. That much is a chazal. That much is, I don't remember if it's a medrash or a gemara. Anyway, the Pachad Yitzchak explains this to me. What's underlying here? What's between the lines? The main thing that the angels were opposed to in the giving of the Torah, is that it's going from Shamayim to Eretz. It's going from the heaven to the earth. Very famous gemara about a dispute that went on between various Tanaim, various authors of the Mishnah, and there was one recalcitrant rabbi who was a very, very great Torah scholar, perhaps a preeminent Torah scholar of his generation, but the majority voted him down. And he kept on sticking to his guns. And he made all kinds of his name, I'm having a senior moment, his name is escaping me at the moment. But he made all kinds of signs he was right. He says, if I'm not right, let the walls of the Beis Medrash, of the study hall, begin to collapse. And they began to collapse. Right? And finally he said, I forgot, he had all kinds of other miraculous things that he did, to prove his point. And finally he said, if the halakha is like me, if the way we're supposed to conduct ourselves is according to my ruling, let a baskal it means a heavenly echo. It's like a low-level kind of prophecy. It means literally a daughter of a voice. Let a baskal emerge and put its imprimatur, in my opinion. Let it say that I'm right. And it did. And Rabbi Yeshua, I think Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachi, got up on his feet and he said, this is nonsense. This is inadmissible. Loi b'shamayim. It's not in heaven anymore. I'm not interested in heavenly voices. Once the Torah has been given to earth, we determine what the halach is. God gave the Torah into our hands, us, the sages of Israel, for us to determine what the final determination of the halach is. The angel is saying, you have to hear, leave it in heaven. That means don't give human beings veto power. Don't give them final, if you will, artistic license, interpretive power of what the Torah is. You're weak. That looks weak. How many Jews have we lost over the last 200, 300, 1,000 years? Because they said, I could deal with the Torah if I knew it was all divine. But all these man-made embellishments, I'm not interested in that. Why should I listen to another human being? Huh? It's a weakening of the Torah if you give it to human beings. If you let human beings have the power of the final determination and interpretation of the Torah. That's what the angels were saying. And that's why it's called, in this context, the beauty of Torah is called Hod. It's almost like they're undoing their own claim against humanity. It's as if God put words in their mouth to undermine their argument. It's a Hod. It looks like a weakness. But ultimately, this is the adaptive power of the Torah. This is the collaborative power of the Torah. This is what raises the earth up to the heaven. When I gave the Torah, I lowered the heavens to the earth. And this power of human beings, chiseled from clay, to attain a kind of divine mind, a divine intuitiveness, That's ultimately the strength of the Torah. That flexibility, that veto power, that, in a certain sense, God saying, my bowing to them, that's ultimately going to be the everlasting strength of the Torah. The Torah that endures all the storms. South wind, north wind, it doesn't matter. Okay. So much for the Midah of Hod and Lag BaOmer. And now for tonight's class. Obviously, it's very easy to see the connection between this, the metaphor of the reed and the cedar tree, to the human spine. The human spine has both qualities. The human spine is perfectly capable of totally prostrating itself on the floor, certainly of bending itself and bowing itself in a sign of submission and deference and dependence. But the human spine is also our pride, our erect posture. Show a little backbone, right? You want to, right? Have a little spine, right? You got a yellow streak down your spine. There's so much in world culture, in Jewish culture, and in world culture that relates, right? Who was it who said it? I forgot who said it. I actually have it right here. Yeah. I don't know who this author is. I think it's a cookbook, so I don't know how a cookbook author came up with such a good line. Clementine Paddleford. Did anyone ever hear of Clementine Paddleford? No. Anyway, she said, never grow a wishbone, daughter, where your backbone ought to be. Okay? It's a good piece of advice. Right? We have this idea of a backbone, a chut hashedra, a spinal column is about resistance, it's about independence, it's about having an autonomous self, an autonomous opinion. Okay. So let's begin with something that's actually coming up in this week's Parsha. Let me get the exact location here. Okay. This is Leviticus chapter 26, verse 13. Leviticus 26, 13. I'll tell you what page it's on momentarily.
13, you said?
26.
641.
641?
I think so.
Great. Okay. We have a double parsha coming up this week, Bahar B'chukosai. If you can say this about a passage in the Torah, B'chukosai is a little bit infamous for what we call the tochacha, the chastisements, or as Rabbi Kaplan kind of diffuses the very hot term of tochacha, punishments for disobedience. But there's a little preamble before the punishments for disobedience are the promises of reward for obedience. And the very last words are, see in verse 13 on page 641. I am God, your Lord. I brought you out of Egypt, where you were slaves. I broke the bands of your yoke and led you forth with your heads held high. It's one of the great Yehudim, one of the great brachos is V'olich eschem komemius, if you see the Hebrew. Okay? And it's one of the things that we have in our siddur that we say, V'elecheinu b'mheira komemius li'atzenu. Okay, there's even a town in Israel called Komamiut, based on this pasuk. And all the Mefarshim, all the commentaries, relate this word Komamius to two things. Komaz kufa, on erect posture, right? And freedom. Okay? And then it's pretty much straight in the verse. We're talking about the exodus of Egypt, we're talking about the transformation of slaves into free men, talking about the liberation of slaves. I love you, the Targum Yonason puts it best. Targum Yonason combines the two pshatim. The words of Yonason are, Udvaris yascham b'nei b'nei chayri. I led you out from among them, from among the Egyptians, as free men. V'halachis yascham b'kayim eskufa. And I caused you to walk with an erect posture. Okay, obviously this motos ulchem, the bands of the yoke, I forget which one says it. I think the Svarnei says it. That's the part of the yoke, the leather band of the yoke, is what goes on the animal's neck, or in this case the slave's neck. They actually had human beings schlepping carts and so on and so forth when the Jews were slaves in Egypt. Right? That's the part that bends the neck to be able to carry the yoke. So we're talking about, instead of a bent, subservient neck, we're talking about an upright, erect neck that I'm not under anyone's yoke. I'm a free man now. Okay. So, one of the beautiful things of this yayud, of this brach, of this imagery, is the mere fact when we talk about the uniqueness of a human being. When you think about it, and again, I don't want to go into the whole, evolution versus creation debate, but let's face it, even the most advanced primates do not really have an erect posture. They really walk on all fours. Maybe, for a few moments they can walk around, with some kind of a, if you'll pardon the expression, aping of the human erect posture. But essentially, it's only human beings that have that erect posture. And in terms of this class, it's only those of you who were here for last week's class understand that a human erect posture allows a head that's rooted in heaven. We spoke about last week how a human being is like an inverted tree. According to the Ramchal, you're an inverted tree, the roots are in heaven, and the main trunk is here, and the extremities branch out. Okay. So now I'm ready to speak about, obviously, that part of our anatomy that allows for our unique erect posture is our spinal columns, on what we're talking about tonight. Now I'm ready to talk about a little bit the interplay between spines and serpents. Very interesting Gemara in Tractate Bava Kama 16a. I'll give you a running translation. An overtly mystical piece of Gemara. Okay? I don't think the Gemara means literally spontaneous generation. I'm not sure what the Gemara means. I don't think, again, I'm overstepping my bounds. I always say any similarity between me and a Jewish mystic is purely coincidental. I don't know a simple way to explain this Gemara. They're obviously talking matters that are in the field of Jewish mysticism. It says as follows. The spine of a human being, this is the very bottom of the page, Bava Kama 16a. If anyone wants to look up in a good English Art Scroll translation after we're done. The spine of a human being, 7 years post-mortem, after the person is dead for 7 years, is transformed into a snake, to a serpent. And this is only true if the person did not bow by modin. There is a part of the Shemona Esrei, of the silent standing devotion, called modin. The proper posture for modin is one of bowing down. When you say the words modin anachnu lach, we confess to you or we thank you, you're supposed to bow your head, you're supposed to bow down. Right? Elsewhere in Chazal it says that the proper kind of bowing is, some people do a perfunctory, and they're done with it. It says, until there's a cracking of all the vertebrae in the spine. Right? It doesn't mean literally, you have to run to joint diseases after every prayer. Right? What it means is, like kind of a crack of the knuckle, that the discs, the soft tissue discs separating each vertebrae get kind of an airing out, when you bend down. It should be a good full bow. Right? So when you bow, by modem, by Shemona Esrei, this doesn't happen to you. If you fail to bow, this is what becomes of your spinal column. Okay, it's a very cryptic Gemara. We need to talk a lot before we can get back to explain it, so please hold off questions till later. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is some anatomical contrasts. Okay? This much I did look up, and I've seen on websites that snake vertebrae range from 130 to 500 vertebrae. And except for the tail of the snake, here defined as any part of the snake's body below their anus, except for that part of the vertebra of the snake, they all have ribs. Okay? So in other words, a snake that has 500 vertebra, before the tail, has 250 ribs. Okay? A human being has 24 to 33 vertebrae. What do I mean by that? Okay, here it got very confusing. Again, especially for somebody with as little anatomy background as me, it seems that when babies are born, there's a full complement of 33 vertebrae, and that's why. As they get older, as part of normal development, just naturally, some of these vertebrae begin to fuse. Also, there's all kinds of arguments between various anatomical studies. There are certain bones in the backbone. There are actually 3 to 5 bones fused together. They count those as 3, they count those as 5, they count those as 1. That's where you get this variance between exactly how many vertebrae there are in the human back. Chazal say, our sages tell us there are 18 vertebrae in the human back. And again, are they only counting the thoracic and the cervical vertebra? It's hard to know. You tell a person uninitiated in Torah that there are 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, and 248 correspond to Ramach. Once I Ramach environment, 248 correspond to the limbs and the organs, and 365 correspond to the nerve endings or the ligaments or the tendons. It's not clear. So that's preposterous. I studied anatomy. There are thousands of limbs and organs. Again, you have to know, what a scientist defines as an organ, and what we might consider an organ group. The Chazal count as only one. There are ways of reconciling the disparity. So, but I'm just telling you, what it says in the Gemara and what it says in the anatomy textbooks. Okay, only 9 of the human vertebrae extrude ribs. Okay. The obvious observations from these things, first of all, the comparison. Basically, a snake is all backbone. Not an erect backbone, but a snake having no extremities whatsoever, has neither hands nor legs. Okay, you could really look at the skeleton of a snake and say that's one long, big backbone. If you had to compare it to one part of the human skeletal structure, okay, especially since it's got so many ribs extruding. That's one of the signs of at least the thoracic vertebrae, is that it's got the rib cage extruding from it. All right? So in a certain sense, you could define a snake as a human being reduced to pure backbone. That's number one. Number two, and we'll come back to this later, we all know very, very obvious gematria, numerical value for 18. What does 18 mean in Hebrew? When I say just tell us that there are 18 vertebrae in the human back. Chai. Chai means life. Okay. So apparently we associate the backbone with life itself. On a simple level, okay, the whole skeletal structure depends on the backbone. We know that the backbone, the skeletal part of the backbone, sheathes the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the two-way traffic through which the brain directs everything conscious and unconscious in all of our other systems, and the way our 5 senses relate information to the brain that the brain has to process. Right? So certainly the backbone and the spinal cord that it sheathes is very much the stuff of life itself. But there is a deeper meaning, again, we'll get to a little bit later in the class. Now, we spoke earlier in the class about the comparison, the contrast between the reed, the supple reed, and the strong but intransigent cedar tree. And the truth is, when you think about the human backbone, it really comprises both elements. Why? First, let's talk about bones in general. Yes, what do you want to say, Elise?
I was just going to say, it keeps us straight, like we mentioned earlier, it keeps us straight, but we also could bow, we can also bend, split.
Right. Okay, but let me first speak about bones in general before we get to the backbone in particular. Okay? I can't remember if it's when Jacob or when Moses blesses the tribes. Give me 2 seconds and I'll have it for you in a moment. Page 247. When our patriarch Yaakov, Jacob, is on his deathbed and he's blessing his sons, the various tribes of Israel. So, He blesses the tribe of Issachar as follows. Page 247, verse 14. Issachar is a strong-boned donkey, stretching out between the saddlebags. Strong-boned donkey, it's a unique word for the word bone. Garem. Garem, again, is really etymologically more Aramaic than Hebrew. All over the Torah, the word for a bone is an etzem. Right? But in any event, the point is, Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin points out that we would usually associate strength with muscular strength. Right? He says, you see from this verse that the strength to bear burdens, anyway, relates first and foremost to the bones. The bones are really the source of a person's strength. And anyone who has had, or anyone who knows anybody with osteoporosis or any other, skeletal degenerative diseases, arthritis and others, knows that without strong bones, it's very hard to have any strength as a human being altogether. No matter how many of the rest of your systems are in order, if you got weak, brittle bones, you're not really going to be strong. In Hebrew, the word etzem means what? Our resident Hebrew expert. Synonym, two definitions. Etzem could mean
bone,
or
the major, or the main, or
the
essence.
The essence, the thing itself. Okay? How do you say in modern Hebrew, I myself?
That's me.
That's me. I in my bone? No, I myself. You see, the bone is related to the very core of identity, of the thing itself. However, this strength, this ability to bear, if you will, to bear a wind, we know has an inner weakness too. Right? You don't want to be as strong and as tough and as non-brittle as the cedar tree. Because ultimately you come up against an opponent even stronger than you, and then for lack of bending you break. Right? That's an eternal weakness that inheres in every strength. Right? But as Ali said, the spine combines both qualities. It's got the discs in between each vertebra for flexibility. Each individual bone is bone-like, is tough. It's got to be tough to be a good shield for the spinal cord. Right? But nevertheless, looked at as a unit, the backbone, we call it the backbone as if it's one bone. When in fact it's 18, 24, 33, however many you count. Right? But it's really a series of bones. We look at them as a unit. We call it our backbone, singular, right? But it's an accordion-like bone. It's a bone that combines both qualities. The quality of resistance, the quality, like we were saying before, show a little spine, show a little courage, show a little backbone. Don't have a wishbone, have a backbone, right? How did that guy say in Slaughterhouse 5, Corvani has a line. One of his characters said, I've seen sterner backbones in men carved out of a banana. He was trying to put somebody down, right? Right? So it's got strength, and yet it's got flexibility. Okay, let's start that. We're getting a lot of prerequisites, and hopefully we're going to tie everything together at the end. And I better hurry up, because I have another class tonight at 9:20. Okay, another part of Chumash where I want to contrast snakes and, if not backbone, stiff things. Can anyone take a guess what I'm referring to, what I'm alluding to?
Moshe's staff.
Exactly. Spell it out. Moshe's staff doing what?
Turning from a staff into a snake.
Excellent.
And back again.
Excellent. Okay, so this is in Exodus 4, verses 2 through 4. It's actually two places where God describes to him how he's going to do it, then later when he actually does it. But let's start where God commands him to do it. It's Exodus 4, okay? And it's 2 through 4. Actually, we can go 2 through 7. Okay? Let's read it. Page 273. Okay. 273. Helene, you want to read it for us? Read us on 273 from verses 2 through 7.
What is that in your hand? Asked God. A staff. throw it on the ground. When Moses threw it on the ground, it turned into a snake, and Moses ran away from it. God said to Moses, reach out and grasp its tail. When Moses reached out and grasped the snake, it turned back into a staff in his hand. This is so that they will believe that God appeared to you, he said, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God then said to Moses, place your hand on your chest inside your robe. When Moses placed his hand in his robe and removed it from his chest, it was leprous, as white as snow. Place your hand in your robe again, said God. Moses placed his hand back into his robe, and when he removed it from his chest, his skin had returned to normal. If they did not...
Okay, that's enough. We don't have to read it. Okay, so we've got two sets of miracles over here. Turning a staff into a snake and back again, and turning a hand leprous and healthy again. Okay, so I want to share with you what a lot of the commentators say about this. Okay, the first thing that I think we have to bear in mind is that we're dealing here with matters of life and death. It's not just a question of liberation versus slavery. In a certain sense, it's life and death. And the metaphor here is that God is trying to present credentials. I am the God of the universe. I'm the ultimate master over life and death. He says, take your inert, presently dead staff and turn it into something living, turning it into a snake. And then you can turn it dead again. All right? That means I can kill the living, God is basically saying. The second miracle is I can resurrect the dead. Leprosy is associated with death. Okay, when Aaron is beseeching Moshe to pray for their sister Miriam, who had gone leprous, he says to Moshe, pray for her healing. Al natihi kames, asher b'tzeisa merechem imai v'yechal chatzi b'sara. Let her not be like a corpse that upon exiting its mother's womb, half of its flesh is consumed. Okay, I'm not going into right now the poetic flourish, what he says at the end about exiting its mother's womb. But he says, don't let her be like dead. What do you mean? She's not dead, she's sick. It's a skin condition. No, it's associated with a living death. It's like a death that attaches itself to the human being. And parenthetically, when Rabbi Tzadok talks about the fact that according to Jewish ritual law, purity and impurity, a leprous person is like excommunicated, has to leave all three encampments of the Jewish people. He says, you'll find, that ugliness is only skin deep. Yes, it's a kind of death, it's a kind of impurity, right? But it never attaches itself to the bones. Okay, the whole concept of Nagayim, the whole Torah that deals with leprous infections is always an affliction of the skin of the epidermis. It's never in the bones. The bones is the strength, and like we said before, atzmiut, the very essence of the human being. Okay, so that's something that the Sforno says. The Kli Yakar, there are other commentaries too, but I see time's running out. I've got to cut some things out over here. Kli Yakar says that the mata is symbolic of an erect spine. He says it's a koma skufa. He says the symbolism of this mofes, right? It's not just a presentation of God's credentials. It's Moshe Rabbeinu wants credibility with the Jewish people that you sent me. Ultimately, he ends up doing these tricks for Pharaoh and the member of his court. But if you follow the context over here, Moshe Rabbeinu is talking about it in terms of his mission on behalf of the Jewish people. It's part of his credibility with the Jewish people. The symbolism here is, you descended into Egypt in the first place, your family, as free men. Kama skufa, erect posture, like staffs. Right? Then you became subservient and ground-hugging like snakes. Slithering and always with the bowing of the head, the vertical made horizontal. But ultimately you're going to become a staff again. I'm going to take you out of Egypt. This whole thing is a metaphor for the redemptive process for the liberation of slaves. So says the Kli Yakar. The Targum Yonason says something amazing over here. He says, this is not a message to the Jewish people, this is a message to Pharaoh. And he says, and again we're waxing overtly mystical over here. He says, that the same way at the end of this redemptive process, by the slaying of the firstborn, the wailing, figuratively and literally, is going to be heard from, you ever heard the expression about the American Revolution? Or the time the Dodgers lost the one-game playoff to the Giants, the shot heard around the world, right? The scream, the yell heard around the world was the scream of the slaying of the firstborn on the night of the Exodus. And he says, as it will be in the future, so it was in the past. And the words of the Targum, Yonasan, are referring to the primordial serpent, the snake that seduced Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He said, Kadis artel min sheruya, when it was made naked from the beginning. Okay, so the super commentary on the Targum Yonasan says that according to our tradition, the primordial snake, before the fall of human beings, was an erect being. Before I said only human beings walk erect, even primates, that's true now. But before the fall of man was also the fall of serpent. Okay, there's a shared destiny in a certain sense between men and serpents. There's not something that J.K. Rowling made up in Harry Potter. Okay, maybe that's where she took it from. Maybe that's what inspired her, is the whole biblical theme. Be that as it may, right? The serpent of the Garden of Eden had extremities, had hands and legs, perhaps a tail as well, but had hands and legs. And part of the curse of the snake, it's overt, it's right there in the pasuk, is Al Gechayin Chatelech. Now I've cursed you, now you're going to crawl on your belly. The clear implication was that before that, it went along on its own 2 feet. And the wail of that snake, of that serpent, okay, it wasn't decapitation, but it was the cutting off of the extremities. When the snake lost its hands and legs, that wail was something that was heard around the world. That's what the Targum Yonasan says. Personally, humble me, I want to take a dissenting opinion and say something that it says in the Zohar, not that I study the Zohar, even on Lag B'Omer. I saw it in a secondary source from Tzaddik. He says that our sages tell us that a snake sheds its skin every 7 years. A lot of sevens associated with snakes, very appropriate for Tzvius Omer. 7 years after a person dies, the backbone transforms into a snake. 7-year gestation period, supposedly, for snakes, according to Talmudic biology. And also 7 years between the shedding of skins. And the Zohar says that when a snake sheds its skin, again, it wails in a way that it's heard from one end of the world to the other. To me, that use much closer to the word is artel. It was made naked, like divesting of a skin, of a coat. I know you're going to ask me that that's not true according to science.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was going
What? Yeah.
no, I was going to say my cousin's husband's a doctor. He said the skeletal system in the humans regenerates every 7 years.
Okay.
Except to,
Okay, that would be a good correlation, assuming we have our anatomy about snakes correct. Okay. Fine. Matters of life and death as they relate to spines and snakes. With all apologies to the Svarnai that said that the inert staff being turned into a living snake is a symbol of rebirth, generally speaking, throughout Talmudic and Midrashic literature, the snake is more than a symbol, the embodiment of death itself. First of all, the snake was the seducer of Adam and Eve, which brought death to humanity. There was only supposed to be one immortal, I'm not even going to call it a species, because that dehumanizes human beings. To call it a species puts on the level of an animal. But human beings were supposed to be immortals, right? And it was only through the interference of the snake that mortality hit us, that death hit us. A. B, famous Gemara tractate, Baba Basra 17a, it says that there were 3 superlative human beings, yeah, who had no, what? Superlative human beings who had no need to die on their own, as it were. Those 3 human beings were Amram, the father of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, Yishai, Jesse, the father of King David, and Kila, one of the sons of King David. He's a minor biblical character. I'm not that familiar with him. These 3 people all died, according to our sages, be'etyo shel nachash, because of the advice of the snake, In other words, they had no independent sin, independent of the sin of Adam and Eve, that would have caused them to die, so to speak, on their own merits. We all earn our own deaths. We don't need Grandpa Adam and Grandma Eve to lay at their door. But these people did. And the way the Gemara says it is, the Gemara doesn't say that they sinned because of the sin of Adam and Eve, or even the seduction of the snake. The vice of the snake, that was their cause of death. So even those who should be immortal have to die because of the snake. Death, besides being an injury, is a great insult. And the diminution of man and snake happened simultaneously. About man after the fall, human beings after the fall, our sages have a metaphor that says, God put his palms upon man, Adam and Eve, and squashed them down and diminished them. Right? And we know what happened to the snake. We said before. Before it was vertical, something that went columnius, something that went with a coma scufa, with an erect posture. And now it was laid low. It's got a crawl on its belly. So that's death. Death is associated with the snake. Life, and immortal life, is associated with the spine. Not only because we said that per Chazal anatomy, that there's 18 bones in the spine. So that's the gematria of chai, the word for life. Not only because in actual hard science anatomy, we know the two-way traffic on the spinal cord, that's the essence of life. But more than that, there's a bone in the spinal column, and there is a city, both called Luz. And both of these are supposed to be impervious to death. Let me read you about it. Okay, I should have had a more primary source, but I don't, so I'm going to read it from the book that really inspired this whole series, Rabbi Avram Yaakov Finkel's In My Flesh I See God. There's a medrash. He brings it here from Vayikra Rabbah. I think it's in Bereshis Rabbah as well. The Roman Emperor Hadrian once asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, from which part of the body will God make man sprout forth when the dead are revived? He replied, from the Luz bone of the spinal column. Now exactly where the Luz is, I think it's part of what we call the cervical spine. I think it's a bone in the neck. If it's C2 or C3 vertebrae, my guess would be it's C2 vertebrae. I'll tell you why a little bit later. What evidence do you have, asked Hadrian, that this is the bone? Bone does not disintegrate like all other bones. Right? People decompose. People die. The flesh goes. We become worm meal after we're dead. And ultimately, even skeletons go. There can be very well-preserved skeletons. Sometimes skeletons, especially mummified remains, can remain for thousands. But ultimately, it's dust to dust. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Right? As proof, Rabbi Yeshua placed a Luz in water, and it did not dissolve. He let it pass through millstones, but it was not ground. He put it in a fire, and it was not incinerated. He placed it in an anvil and struck it with a hammer. The anvil was flattened out and the hammer split, but the Luz remained undamaged. How a rabbi got away with the desecration of the dead like this, I'm not quite sure. Okay, but there's such a medrash that there's an invulnerable bone. At any rate, this is an old tradition in Judaism that the Luz bandel, as it's on, the little Luz bone, never disintegrates. Hasidim have a custom, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, to eat a meal the night of Saturday night, Malava Malka, it's called the escorting of the queen, and supposedly this bone, good bone nutrition, and not from Citrical, good bone nutrition is from Sudas and Malava Malka. Okay? The Luz bandel supposedly gets its only sustenance all week from the Sudas and Malava Malka. At any rate, as far as the city is concerned, there's a Gemara. Did I bring the Gemara? Yes. Sota Mem Vav Mem Beis 46b says as follows. Oh boy, where am I going to find it? Okay. He says there's a Luz, a city called Luz. Same word. City called Luz. Parenthetically, in the Bible, in Chumash, it says that Yaakov Avinu, our patriarch Yaakov, called Bethel Luz. The question of the commentators if it's the same place or not. Luz is a place where they developed the Tchelas dye. Luz is a place where Sancherib, the great Assyrian general, who mixed ancient races together. It's why all the racial laws of Judaism went by the wayside, because they say, Ba Sancherib u'bilbul kalumas. There's everyone today is a hybrid, so to speak. And he was not able to shake up the demographics of this city. This city was invulnerable to his little genetic engineering. Nebuchadnezzar, the great Babylonian sacker, came. He laid waste to so many great cities in Israel, including Jerusalem. He was not able to destroy this town. And even the angel of death cannot traverse, has no right to set foot in this town of Luz.
Does it still exist today?
I doubt it. And I doubt very much that this Gemara is meant to be taken literally. Okay. And when old people get sick of life in the city of Luz, they step outside the city walls, and that's when they die. Okay? Again, literal, not literal, mythical. Can we find it today? We found the fountain of youth. I don't know. Bottom line is, one thing is clear. This word Luz, and it's identified with a bone in the spinal column, is something in Talmudic thought and literature that transcends death. If there's a bone called Luz, that's where resurrection begins from. If there's a city called Luz, that's a place where the angel of death dare not trespass. All right? You want to die in the city of Luz? You're tired of life? You got to leave the city limits. According to this Gemara, it's mind-boggling. Like I said, I'm overstepping my bounds into the overtly mystical a little bit tonight. What is that? 10 or 18? 10? Okay, I have a few more minutes. Okay. A word about necks. Since, like I said, part of the spinal column is the cervical, the neck bones, right? Let's talk about that a little bit. Any of you who've been my students for probably more than 6 months must have heard this word already, but it's pertinent tonight, so it bears repetition. Our sages say that when Joseph revealed himself to the brothers, he fell upon Benjamin's neck and he wept, and Benjamin fell upon his neck and wept as well. And Rashi brings the Medrash, what were they weeping about? And they both had prophetic visions that were very sorrowful visions that caused them to weep. Benjamin saw the destruction of Mishkan Shiloh, the tabernacle of Shiloh, which is in the tribal homeland of Joseph. I don't know if it was Ephraim or Manasseh, which one of the sub-tribes of Joseph. And that's what he wept. They were weeping Tisha B'Av tears. And Yosef saw the destruction of the two temples in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem was partially in the tribal homeland of Judah, and partially, the main part, the part where the altar was in the tribal homeland of Benjamin. So they both saw destructions of temples. And that's what they were crying about. Says the Sfas Emes, and again, this is really the foundation of this whole class. I'm supposed to learn things about the macrocosm from the microcosm that is man. He says, if you want to look for a place in the human body that corresponds to the temple in Jerusalem, that's our necks. Our necks connect our upper spheres, the seat of our intellect, the seat of our neshamas, of our divine souls, right? With our bodies, our trunk, the rest of our bodies, which are basically a highly developed animal, very much of this earth. The bridge, the two-way bridge that connects the two, that's the human neck. That's what a temple is. The temple in Jerusalem, if you're the sci-fi fans out there, an interdimensional portal. A rupture between two dimensions. There's heaven, there's earth. Especially in light of what I spoke about earlier this evening, one would think that after the revelation at Sinai, never shall the twain meet. It's not true. There was one place on earth where there was two-way traffic, as it were, between heaven and earth. Our sages in Pirkei Avos say there were 10 constant miracles in the temple. If it's a place of constant miracles, it's supernatural. I don't mean supernatural, spooky, Halloween supernatural. It's not part of nature. It's not part of terra firma. It's of a different quality than this earth. And yet it was a place on earth. I don't know if Luz is a place on earth. But the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is a place on earth. Okay? But it's the neck of the universe, as it were. So the appropriate place to pray, to mourn a broken neck is on the neck. That Sfas Emes says that's why they're crying on each other's necks. Now, just taking off a little bit from the Sfas Emes, I want to say, we're called a stiff-necked people. I had, unfortunately, this past summer, very up close and personal, a near brush with death. My son was in a catastrophic car accident, and he broke the C2 vertebrae in his neck. Okay, thank God, he's okay, he's wonderful. Actually, he had a very good report from his doctor yesterday. Keep on praying for him. Hopefully, it looks like he's not going to need any more surgery. But at any rate, when the PA of the surgeon in California where the accident occurred tried to explain to me the injury, I said, do me a favor, I'm not a doctor, tell it to me in layman's terms. He said, Mr. Schwartz, I can't put it any more blunt than this. Your son has suffered the hangman's break. In the olden days, when they used to execute people with a noose, this was the vertebrae they aimed for, and this was the fracture that they tried to produce. Okay? So, in other words, you want to kill somebody, you break their neck. And you break their neck in this spot.
And he walked out of the car.
Yes, it's an amazing story, but again, let's not digress because I'm running out of time. The next class has to start. We have two laws in the Torah that talk about killing animals in a way that's not ritual slaughter. Okay, one is something called the Egla Arufa, the decapitated heifer, and one is called Arifas Petach Hamar, when you have a firstborn donkey and you choose not to redeem it, not to transfer its holiness onto a sheep, then you've got to break its neck. And they're both called Arifa. What does the word Aref mean in Hebrew?
Neck.
The neck, the back of the neck. The Zaron, or the Tzavar is the broader neck. The Aref, the neck itself. Okay? So you see that when you want to deal death, as it were, you break a neck. Okay? It's not an accident that most of the customs for mourning for the loss of a loved one and the way Jews mourn on a national level on Tisha B'Av are exactly the same way. You sit on the floor and so on and so forth. Okay. When Jews are called a stiff-necked people, it's a compliment. Rav Merel Premishlamner, one of the great early Hasidic masters, said, what it means is that we've got that resistance, we've got the backbone, the main backbone, so to speak, is in the neck. We refuse to die a spiritual death. You want to kill us, you want to immolate us, you want to drown us, you want to run us through with your swords, we're willing to take that. But just don't break our necks, don't break our Beis HaMikdash, don't break our connection to spirituality. Or Baruch Mezhebezer used to say, it's based on the liturgy, something that we say on Nishmas Kolcha and Shabbos, we say, L'chol koma l'cha tishtachve, some nischas are l'chol levad tishtachve, and every erect posture will bow to you. So Romero Prameshlana says, the kunz is to bow while being erect. He says, it's not just a question of an orthopedic exercise, of cracking your vertebrae, like I said before. Okay? It's a mental thing, it's an emotional thing. You can be erect to the rest of the world, but in your heart you're humble and you're subservient to God. The chol koma, it's a koma, it's a komas kufa, it's an erect posture. But it's bowing and it's bending to you. And finally, one thing that struck me, and again, I'm not going to look it up or read you the verse because we're really, really tight on time right now, is that there's a miracle. He spoke about 10 miracles that occur constantly in the temple. There were some miracles in the tabernacle and the Porta Temple as well. You know, if you remember the structure, if you've ever studied Parshas Truma, you know that the tabernacle in the wilderness was composed of vertical boards. That's what formed the walls. And how did these boards come together? Almost like vertical pillars, more like. How did they come together to form a wall? Okay? So you had sockets on the bottom, you had rings on the top, and you had staves going through the outside of the walls. I'm going to need about another 5 or 10 minutes. You had staves going through the walls. Then there's something called the Briach HaTichon, the inner stave. So, according to some commentaries, okay, assuming this is your aerial, your bird's eye view of the temple, and this is the entrance, and this is the back wall. This is the wall of the inner sanctum. So there were three interior staves. One going up the southern wall, one going up the northern wall, and east, I guess, right? One going on the eastern wall. Another interpretation of the internal stave, not the external staves on the walls, was there was one long stave that went all the way around these three walls. Problem is, that's architecturally impossible. How do you get a stave that, for want of a better verb, snakes that way, right, and yet comes out straight? So Targum Yasin says it was a miracle. It says when it was removed from the wall of the tabernacle, it was straight as a staff, which we've already seen before in the Kliyaka is a symbol of the human spine, a staff. And when it was in, it moved, it slithered like a snake. Those are his words, Targum Yasin, not mine. So you see that this whole dynamic, this whole contrast between snakes, serpents, I should say, and spines, right, goes to the very core of Migdash, of Shekhinah, of Hashras HaShekhinah, of the divine indwelling on earth. Right? And as we know, again, we always talk microcosm, macrocosm. What happens in the big world, that has to happen in the little cosmos called the human being. It's this ability to not have the haughtiness, the cedar-like arrogance of the snake, to form our own agenda, and never to bend ourselves to God's will. The snake is saying to Adam and Eve, listen to me. I'm not bending to the will of God, you shouldn't either. Right? And to take that and have the human capacity to be at once koma, erect, a king, a free man, tishtachadeh. But with a contrite heart, with a humble heart, with a spine that's stiff and courageous and oppositional, but with the capacity, the reed-like capacity to bend where it has to bend. That's the meat of Hod, the beauty of Hod. Hod Shabbat, I should say, the night of Lag BaOmer. And I had a little bit more to say, but what can I tell you? I'm being grabbed by the clock. I have to start the class a little bit earlier. Please come next week. What's the class next week in the anatomy series? What organ are we doing? I think digestive fast tractors, right? We're going to talk about the digestive tract.